What up, ladies and gentlemen? We are here with another castover. This one was from a couple of days ago. It was played on the 17th, so actually a little bit before even we had some of the, the action since then, right? But it's been on pre-release. This was technically the Ascension patch, actually. So exactly the same as what you've seen in the tournament thus far, if you've been watching. And we have a new face around here, an XD man himself who's famous for typing XD at the end of every one of his messages, and sometimes as the sole content of his messages. It will be Scoler, and I have his name down as 1234 because that's what he signed up as the tournament in Ascension number 5. As of the recording of this video, by the way, we are 3 slots away from being fully completed. There's technically 4 slots open because 3Crow hasn't submitted his formal application, but he's been in my DMs talking about how he wants to play. So yeah, we have 3 slots essentially, unless I guess he forgets to submit and then 4 more people walk up and start submitting. But either way, Scoler is indeed going to be participating in that. And he's still learning the game, and at this point, I think this is one of the earlier matches that he participated in, but he's playing as Zerg, whereas he signed up as Terran, so that'll be kind of interesting to see maybe his tendencies. And we are on a new map as well, Thin Ice, a map by Veek7. He made this map after I put out the call for additional maps to be made. I'm looking around to see, yeah, this map was updated a little bit with some more cover back here, just to prevent, players being griefed in their third location if they want to take that base as their third, but that is a separate issue, and I don't even know if it'll show up in this particular game, but we'll see. I have no idea how long these matches are. I actually didn't really look at the submission this time around as far as like the form goes. I mean, I did initially, but these were played a long time ago, and I only just now checked back to see what version of the game to downgrade to. And there is going to be a little bit of harassment between these 2 units. It always is interesting to me when people go for stuff like that, but it's going to be Nathracores first here. I didn't really comment too much on the build. Obviously, Shambler has a gateway. The Nathracores are a little bit Tismic with their movement. We are still trying to improve them, so you will probably see some unfortunate movement with them in general. And actually, I don't believe that Scoler went for an expansion, or rather for a scout. He is going to go ahead and go for an expansion. This map, obviously, very, very long distance between the bases. This is probably going to be a problem for Zerg, but we'll see how that one evolves over time. You might even consider having like maybe an in-base Nat or something that is lower yield to allow Zerg to expand a little bit more safely. Or either that or, maybe try to move the ramp closer to or I guess these resources closer to the ramp or something like that, right? But, the Nathracores are going to pop in here. They'll be zoned away by an Ecclesiast. The Ecclesiast is a really good choice versus Nathracores because it kind of prevents the Naths from being able to have kill pressure. Although I think 2 of them would beat 1 Ecclesiast. It would be pretty close because the Ecclesiast would repeatedly sustain between Nathracor attacks. But, there was a second one on the way, and obviously a second gateway. So, Scoler not going to be pressuring too much just yet. Scoler is actually the sole man who is currently actively playing from Peru in Cosmonarchy Brood War. Terror, who is I would say an amateur / semi-pro Terran, is actually, he's been streaming a decent amount, of course, and he is aware of the project, so, he might end up popping in and seeing what's going on, and then maybe recognizing Scoler from, their community, if they're at all familiar with each other. Scoler says he's about a C rank in Brood War, so, nothing to scoff at per se. That's probably around the area that we would all be at. I imagine I'd be C or B or something like that if I played Brood War actively. Now, the Ecclesiasts are really preventing the melee-focused crowd here from doing too much damage, and the Dracodon has the most armor as well. So what you'd probably want to do in this particular case is use the Vorverkor's passive to reduce the attack rate of the Ecclesiast, but there's so many of them that at this point it is overwhelming the defense. So we are going to see a Circuith being mutated at the front line. There is one in the base as well in case the pivot goes up the ramp, which normally wouldn't be good play, but in this particular case you do have to be aware of that because the distance between the ramp is so high. Instead, it's going to be targeted down immediately, and there's not that many units here for Monsieur Scoler. He is going to go ahead and grab some Gorgacores. There's at least one of them in the eggs. The one in his main is not being hatched at all. Now, finally, you will see the first Protoss unit fall. It will be soon replaced by a Zealot, but the air units should help to reduce the efficacy of this push. However, there's still no ranged units coming out here. That Drakiden is almost certainly going to get picked off, and there's only the one worker to even be damaged at the main right now. So Scoler is not really going to be too, mishappy about that. He's only losing one worker so far, and Shambler obviously floating a decent amount of money back at home. So here comes the committal into the fight. There is some emphasis on picking off the Ecclesiasts, and we do see two of them falling relatively quickly. That wounded Drakiden will also fall in short order, and the Zealot was not able to get any help from that last remaining Ecclesia, so it too will be picked apart by the Zethrakors. And Shambler is now going to go ahead and spend some of his minerals on a Nexus. He's massing out lots of Ecclesiasts and adding a third gate as well, since he does have the capital to do so. Interestingly enough, though, he's sticking to his guns in that respect. Shambler did make it to 5-game series between him and Mystery Meat, the other premier player, before maybe Nablime can start to contend for that kind of throne now within Cosmonarchy Brood War. And that was in an Ascension tournament not so long ago, right? That was Ascension 3. So he knows his stuff as far as Protoss is concerned, despite the fact that, indeed, they do have changed. They have received some changes since then. However, Shambler is adding a decent amount of static defense, expecting some sort of counterattack. And there are a lot of Nathracors, right? We have a dozen of them already out. We have a couple of Gorgs finishing up here, as well as some Zethrakors. But only on 2-hatch production right now is Scoler, and he is, of course, saturating his gas first and foremost. Something I noticed is he's only putting 2 workers on each, and earlier he was also he put 1 worker on each one of these, even though you would want to double saturate the geyser first. That's like a small, subtle tip that you can use as you're learning the project. Something I guess I didn't really cover in my macro video, but I almost kind of felt like it would be standard fare. A Lakizalisk or 2 would definitely start shredding this army, but it doesn't look like that's in the cards here for Scoler. Maybe he's trying to save his gas for something else. He will go ahead and try to engage the army, and the Nats can really heavily focus down some of these units, right? The Warden is not necessarily long for the world, because obviously the Ecclesiasts are, being splash damaged by the Gorgs. As of right now, we still only have a loss of the Zeths and 2 Nats. So this force is quite overwhelming here for Shambler. He only has the units that he's getting out of the gateway. He didn't specialize into any sort of crowd control, which would have required, Grand Library for Atreus or Cantavis. Obviously could have also, a bit of a misrally on the Drilleth there, but, maybe he's just going to go ahead and build yeah, he's just hanging out here. I think he's got it in a control group or something. Either way, spending his money now back at home. But yeah, you could have maybe seen idols out of a lattice or something like that. That also could have definitely helped out a bit. He has the Matrix, but it's multi-target. It's not splash, so it can attack up to 4 units. It's going to be pretty effective at dealing with the Nats, but it'll probably just end up getting focused down, if we're honest. So do have to be a little bit cautious about this. The Ecclesiasts are going to help with the shield regeneration, but yeah, all the Nats dealing most of the damage here. The Gorg's just splashing a lot of targets. And admittedly, the Matrix did fire off a number of damage, a number of DPS there. I don't think we have any more Nats. So we have 2 very wounded Nats and 1.5 Gorgs or so in terms of HP. Maybe a little bit closer to 2 Gorgs, actually. Drakidens are going to be adept at picking these off, and I think the gates can be held. Behind this, of course, Scoler not really adding more workers. Still mostly hell-bent on adding military. Finally does have some Lakizalisks, is going to borrow those. An exciting little tidbit here, I did fix it so that when you group select units like the Lakizalisk, or any borrowed unit in that, for that matter, you will actually still see the basic commands like attack and move. Finally, Lard fixed that. I feel like that's a really silly thing that was ever a problem. Now, their embassy is out, but there is no witness as far as I can tell. So, I'm like mass selecting here in case it's like just hard to see. And the money is there for it. So right now, Shambler is more focused on dealing with the melee units. And I think he's doing pretty good damage. He's not losing too many units. The Drakiden there is very, very low and could very easily, get picked off by the return salvo on that lower Lakizalisk. A Warden being added here, another one. Okay, yeah, that's all well and good, but you still don't really have any way of knowing, of attacking, getting vision on those Lakizalisks, right? There's no melee units here, just adding more Drakidens. This gateway will fall before the Drakiden finishes there, unless Shambler is able to interrupt it. And finally getting a witness now. It feels like it's over a minute delayed. Now starting to maybe take some of the shots with his Drakidens, but yeah, it is going to end up breaking down that gateway, forcing a automatic refund. And yeah, Shambler tried to step forward a little bit too close, maybe thinking that Scoler would over-prioritize the low HP gateway or something, and then he could get a little bit closer onto that Lakizalisk. But finally, the witness will be out, and there is no active detection here for Scoler, so that won't be contested at any point, and the Drakidens can now start to actually contend with the Lakizalisks themselves, forcing them to unburrow, presumably. Without this Gorgakor for vision, the Lakizalisks won't be able to see too much. You do lose half of your vision in CMBW when you're burrowed, so that is an important note. But the Gorgor Core is finally getting picked off, and normally I would say, okay, Shambler's definitely, very, very far behind. He's been contained, but look, back at the home base, right? We don't have a tier 2 up. We don't have max gas saturation on either one of the bases, still 2 out of 3 for each one of those nodes. We don't have a third base coming up, and we have, okay, we do have extra hatches being added, but that's just going to help him spend his money now. It's not going to let him, get a little bit closer to teching up, right? And there is a fearsome number of Drakidans, while Shambler is also going to expand. So he thinks he's stabilized against a majority air unit composition. This is a little bit spooky because you wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable leaving your base. And the Witness, I don't think, left the base either, unless it's, trailing behind the army somewhere. Okay, it's along for the ride here. So I would have maybe wanted to take some sort of like forward positioning and then use the Witness to confirm that I'm actually alive. This does feel like a risk to me, but maybe sometimes when you feel like you're behind, you have to take risks. There's another very formidable army here, and it 100% can upset the Drakidans. And yeah, at this point, I think Shambler expects there to be a third base, but there isn't a third base, right? These Nats will find out where most of the Drakidans are, and that might pull the trigger for Scoler to either, sick in on the attack. There's only 3 Wardens. That's definitely beatable here. Or turn around and try to help. Actually, these Nats are slowing down the retreat path of some of those Drakidans as well. So if Shambler thinks that it's a good time for him to pull away, yeah, that's absolutely going to stop him from having a synced up army, which could allow this army to do a lot more for Scoler than what you might expect. Some kiting attempts, but the Wardens are dead. Scribes have been transferred. The Nexus is established, so he's not really going to lose out on too much mining time, but he could lose a couple of straggler workers, and in fact, it looks like he will. At least 3 of them do fall. A 4th one down here, you can see the corpse helpfully telling us how many workers were lost in that engagement, and crucially, he did lose a lot of map tempo and pressure, and this will allow somebody like Scoler to maybe make some more units. He has the Hydrith Den. Obviously, he can go for another expansion. He has all of these macro hatches. He definitely needs to overly saturate his worker lines in general. He's pretty far behind, it feels like, in terms of workers. I mean, he technically does have more, but I'm not honestly sure where they are, Like, I guess we've got 15 in that base and something like 17 in this base. So that explains where the workers are, but it feels pretty low looking at the actual mineral count, right? And as Shambler starts to fully saturate not only his main again after losing some of the workers and transferring a bunch, but, the transfer came in pretty clutch here. He's got almost enough for, double saturation, you could say. Engram is established, and all of these stacked up Nathra cores are going to get melted. The Hydras are being held at bay here a little bit, but of course the Gorgor cores are absorbing a lot of the damage. That Engram not being focused down, instead it's going to be the Matrix, so got a lot more shots than it probably should have, and that Gorgor core with 3 HP will be picked off. There are some more units coming in, but it feels like there's way more Drakidans than Scoler can deal with this number of Hydras. He is getting a little bit of worker kills thanks to his Zethra cores, and he has the one Droleth for whatever reason again. So that's a recurring trend. He's adding another Hatcheros, really intent on remaining at the 2-base play here for now, but he is going up to 5 hatch, so that should give him a little bit of an advantage, you would think. At least in terms of production. He's actually going up to 6, technically. He's got 3 in each base. It just feels his worker count hasn't really moved. The needle hasn't been moved here. He's going to start to, I guess oversaturate now with 4 workers onto the Geyser, but that's still better than undersaturating, you'd think. Realizing that he desperately does need more gas, but only now taking a 3rd base. That space will be contested by Shambler's forces. There is a flock of Naths and a single Engram. I feel like, judging by how the response for Scoler here, again, he's still learning the project. He might not be aware of what deals splash and what doesn't. I try to make that pretty, intuitive when you look at that. But especially if he flies in here without really paying too much attention, I think a lot of his units could clump up here and just get absolutely torn asunder. And you can see that happening right now. He splits a little bit late. A bunch of them just went down all at once down here. And honestly, with 22 frags on that Engram, that's going to be a crushing loss. And it looks like he didn't even finish get the cancel off here because there is no Droleth corpse and instead there's building rubble. So losing a lot on multiple sides is a pretty big deal. That might be how Shambler comes back into this. And it looks like maybe Scoler trying to transfer into a lower gas economy as far as units are concerned, going for the Quasis and the Zeths instead of more Hydras and such. I say that, and more just did hatch. So maybe he can ascend up the tech tree and go up to tier 2, but definitely not scaling his economy up, not expanding. This is allowing his opponent back into the game where, realistically speaking, Shambler should have been dead to rights here. And it looks like, I don't know if he's in the lead per se, but he's definitely not under kill pressure or threat at this point. He's still got 2 gates only, So he's mostly just setting up defenses and such. He can be contested here by a mass Hydra push, so that's definitely the case. It's just a question of whether or not that'll be anytime soon. Another exciting detail, DF, Darkened Fantasies, has been experiencing some interesting things, we'll say. He's been working on something very phenomenal, I would argue. Eventually, Ice will actually have negative height, so it will count as a cliff type. And the same will be true for Swamp in the jungle tile set, because DF has managed to extend height, it looks like. There's still a couple of hooks that need to be done to fully finish it, and a little bit more handling in a couple of other places, but it's looking pretty promising. Now, speaking of promising, he really needs to focus down this engram, but instead he's focused a lot of his attention onto that Warden. A couple more shots coming out from that engram are going to be pretty useful, but the Skither cores have been bruised by that static defense structure. So really, I think a lot of that is providing a heavy amount of value here for Shambler. And that attack was indeed reposted. It felt like the Drakidins thinned the herd a lot. A little bit faster than maybe Scoler was expecting, so he had less units than was really necessary. He does focus down even more of the static defense, and the engrams are expensive, so that will be a temporary win. But the Argosy has finished, and obviously with the Embassy as well, you can see that the Scribe count has caught up to the Droleth count here. They're exactly tied on workers. For those, I guess I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but for those new, we are looking at this case. On the left-hand side is your worker count, the right-hand side is your military count. So you can kind of see what both players are prioritizing. But also remember that Protoss military tends to count for a little bit more. We do have an Empyrean out. If Tier 2 ever does come to pass for Scoler, he can upgrade his, or mutate his Skither cores into Vithrilisks. Obviously removes the ability for them to attack ground, but it's still something. Now, how does he want to make an engagement, right? There are no Wardens, but the Drakidins are in a better spot, and the engram is out to levy some more power here. The Azira cores will shoulder a lot of those shots before it can really do too much, but the Zethra cores, on the other hand, will pop pretty quickly. However, I think the engram's only going to be good for a couple of frags onto the less important units before it gets focused down. The Empyrean is going to finish in the middle of this fight, but the Drakidins look like they'll be not long for this world. And with Azira cores, a couple of Hydras, some Skits, it does feel to me like if there's good focus here from Scoler, at the very least, he's going to kill a lot of these workers, and he might even be able to topple the Empyrean itself. Looks like he's selected the unit, he's analyzing it. Maybe that was also Shambler, we won't really know. But the splash damage coming out from the Empyrean will be able to intercept a lot of the stacked units here. And a little bit of a flubbed micro, or lack of micro, as Scoler is thinking about how to spend his money and tries to focus down the ship. He is getting some hull damage and preventing it from regenerating too many shields, using the Skither core in particular. It will eventually be picked off, and yeah, he's not going to be able to focus it down with just 2 Hydras. He is getting a lot of damage onto it, though. That is worthwhile and certainly worth mentioning. And again, he cut down a little bit of the Scribes. It looks like 5 of them did die, but they've been hard produced. The one difference here is that because Scoler wasn't hard saturating his mineral line over here, his mineral line is a little bit healthier, and it hasn't been depleted as egregiously as Shambler's. And Shambler is still stuck on only 2 bases, whereas the 3rd hatch has finished. Well, the 3rd base, I should say, has finished. 7th hatch, really. This Witness has been spying on the army composition for quite a while, and so the Empyreans are definitely a good choice. But obviously the static defense wasn't quite set up here for Shambler when that last attack commenced. And he's going to see the move out now. If he's aware of the mini-map, he should see a lot of purple dots leaving that neck of the woods. The rally points haven't really been super spectacular for Scoler. He definitely could have rallied maybe over here, and then his, a lot of his units would have done some things. He's slipping on the macro a little bit as well, not transferring his workers to his 3rd, which would be, a pretty good move at this point, and, remaking them from there. The wounded Empyrean is on the front lines here at this point, so that is definitely a point of contention as it does start to fall away. But, the Wardens are just about done here, and that's definitely going to help a lot in this fight. There are some Zoryustalets. They'll tank some hits. They'd be really good against engrams in particular, and they are occupying a large number of the Drakidins for a good while. Even just one of them will do that. But as the Wardens do get popped, I don't think that the Empyreans are going to get handled in the same way. And we don't have Tier 2 anywhere in sight, even though he's just about there on the gas count. So he should take this opportunity and really quite heavily, I think, focus on just trying to get that gas up and see if he can... Yeah, he's got the resources now for Tier 2. If he knows about it as a thing in the game, he can definitely make use of that. And he's doing pretty well to continue pressuring Shambler, right? Now an engram coming, that's a huge amount of his gas, and he does have some minerals, but what's he going to spend it on? Maybe some melee units, they could definitely help, but instead he looks like he's going to try to take a third base of his own. Confident that Scoler isn't really even considering that as an option. He hasn't once scouted this area since the air unit stopped being a thing, and 3 Empyreans have been dispatched for the express purpose of starting to attack probably this base, but just generally making some grief here. More Gorgacores on the way, so the gas was not spent on Tier 2. This feels like how Scholar's probably going to lose access to any sort of victory path here, because he still hasn't taken more bases, he still hasn't really saturated his worker lines or anything, and at the same time, he's definitely not really fully aware of the tech tree, and this is understandable. You're going up against Shambler. This guy's won tournaments in the project. He probably knows what's up, so he, at the very least, is going to be aware of the units and what your capabilities are, a little bit more so than you are. Now, remember that Empyreans do deal splash damage, but their projectiles are intercepted by air. So this looks a little bit spooky, but realistically speaking, you know, it's going to be hell for Scoler if he's not careful with his placement. You know, wisely targeting down the Skithricores, which do deal more damage, but now he's being flanked by the Hydras, who have been able to make it over here. And yeah, I think that at least 2 Empyreans are going to be... Yeah, I think all of these are actually going to be forfeit, especially with all of the damage being dealt to that last one. Gorgs will clean that up. More skits are on the way. And indeed, this army is starting to look pretty scary. It really depends on the engagements, though, right? This engram is almost dead. You could definitely go for something here. There wasn't even a Nexus set up by Shambler, instead adding a lot of static defense to try to solidify his hold. That's a little bit spooky for him, because I thought for sure he'd already have it done. And it doesn't look like the distortion has ever been spotted here for Scoler. If he's aware that there's a witness anywhere near him, he's certainly not aware that an Ovaleth will detect it for him and allow him to pick it off. And he, admittedly, besides these 4 Sunkens, or circuits, as they're called in CMBW, he hasn't really gone for much static defense, which I have to commend him for, right? Still no Nexus here. It looks like Shambler should be able to afford it pretty soon, but he just spent all of his money queuing up an Epigraph. He does have one more, as well as, of course, the Empyrean, but I don't know if that's going to be enough. Really, we have to consider how Scoler is going to take fights against the engram. That's going to be the big question. He does have some wounded Gorgs, including one that's very, very low. The Epigraphs are not as threatening as the Empyrean, of course. They are single target, so that feels like a little bit more of a desperation move. But obviously, with hold position right outside his gate, that's going to be a little bit of a problem. A Crucible coming. This is a little bit of a timer for how long Scoler wants to, you know, wait in that case. I think this engram is going to be just fine thanks to the reinforcements there, and that's obviously a decent amount of DPS potential that could have been with the rest of his army. He's starting to get picked apart just by the probing air units here for Shambler. And yeah, unfortunately, his army is looking a lot less scarier by the second. The Hydras cannot reach that. You know, Bactylisks may have been able to, but here comes the engram, and engaging while spread apart, not focusing down that engram, that's going to be probably the death knell of this army. And at that point, I mean, I really don't know what Scoler can do. He has a lot of minerals, but he's not expanding. He only killed, what, 2 structures, and they were Wardens. He didn't kill any of the air units. He killed a single Drakon, and now the Crucible's out to increase the attack rate of that static defense. And that base is going to feel impenetrable, because you're talking about Tier 3 static defense mixed in with a Tier 2, a Tier 2, you know, base enhancement structure. And yeah, as Shambler's pointing out, he is at Tier 1. So the Argosy also is conceptualized as Tier 3. And that's definitely a case where, you know, if Scoler was more familiar with the project, he'd probably feel a little bit better. But he's limiting himself to very small numbers of units. And the units that he's using, yeah, I think, yeah, Shambler's helping him out here a little bit. You know, Scoler is also playing one of the harder races to comprehend, right? I think Protoss is fairly reasonable in CMBW once you figure things out. A little bit of choice paralysis notwithstanding. Definitely made better by the tech crunch that recently happened. Terran, the most straightforward. You kind of tell, like, oh, this requires an Atlas. And then you see in the advanced structures, it requires an Atlas. But the Zerg, they might be the hardest race. And not just, like, unique to CMBW, but in Brood War in general, they're definitely the race with the steepest learning curve, I would say, where small mistakes can definitely add up. Now, curiously enough, Shambler's opted for a Crucible, which is a town center. You can return resources to it, instead of a Nexus. So he's going to be waypointing workers. He does seem to be having some unfortunate... Oh, no, I guess he must have just done this, and they're only now... No. Some of them are having a... Oh, no, he reordered them manually. Okay, never mind. All good. I thought maybe they were getting spun out here. There is a Nexus coming up in here for a 4th base at around the same time as Scholer's going for a 4th base. So... yeah, this set is looking like it's probably going to reach its natural conclusion, at least in this particular match of the set. There are 2 more matches here that I'll cast in separate videos because this one ended up being, fairly lengthy. And yeah, we're seeing sort of like a first-timer's exploration. I think that his general approach to the game, at least at Tier 1, it was pretty impressive. Obviously, he did have Shambler on the ropes there, and Shambler probably had a little bit of a lack of focus, perhaps. But yeah, at this stage, we're looking at just Gorger cores who are rather pitiful versus air. And, okay, maybe he can pop the Crucible. The engram was almost popped, by the way. 34 hits, just a couple of more Gorger core hits would have done it. Maybe he can even do so with the Hydras, but instead he's going to try to evacuate them. Either way, he does stop that base from being mined, and he does kill a decent amount of workers. So he maintains an economic advantage in terms of available resources and workers and all of that stuff. But he's not really using it, right? He hasn't, banked enough gas to afford Tier 2. And, I guess, honestly, like, maybe if you're more familiar with, like, Age of Empires or something, that might make more sense to you because, like, oh, I have to save a bunch of resources and then age up. It's kind of like that here, where you have to save a lot of money in order to make it happen. But, at the same time, okay, no, that's another Hatcherosk. Is this going to be the eye roll? He just spent a little bit of gas, so then he cancels some units. But he is under attack right now, so he might be thrown for a loop here. The Skither cores and the Nather cores are going to try their best to send this fleet packing, this small squadron, really. It's 2 Empyreans, though, and the focus fire is being a little bit spread. One of those Nath is just, enjoying the sights here, not really joining in on the fight. Because, melee units have to have a reduced aggro radius, otherwise they'll just get stuck onto anything. And the Iroh Iris is finally coming. 25.5 minutes into the game, boys. Yeah, a 25-minute eye roll is not what you would expect. But either way, technically he does have it. It's just a question of, is this going to be, over before it's really begun? He's got Zets, but he can't really do anything because of all the static defense. He could attack into here, right? There's no static defense over here. It looks like maybe he's realized that. He wants to go ahead and give that a shot. Obviously, the Witness will spot some of that. More Nath streaming in, but again, there's splash damage on the Empyreans, and the focus fire is not on the wounded one. So any chance that had of happening is not going to be super good. And yeah, what you would probably want here is Mass Skith or maybe Hydra. Yeah, but you would also want higher tier stuff, and he doesn't have that. So let's take a look at how the scribes are doing. An engram does get killed before it's canceled. Crucible is not even close to being done yet. This base is going to be sniped essentially by the Zeths. He definitely needs to indeed focus down some, the engram in that sense. He's trying to kill it with a scribe, which is actually working out a little bit here. Doesn't cancel it, so that's pretty bad. For his resources, but maybe it doesn't matter at this point. This base wasn't providing too much. It was providing gas, which is really important, but, he's got Iroh Iris. What's he going to do with it? Getting a Mutath Spire. He might not be aware that, XD instead of GG. Yeah, I'm not sure if he was aware that you can upgrade your tech nodes, so you can take the Quazeth, turn it into a Leveril, or a Kalkir as it's called. The Hydrith can become a Backteth, etc. So that will give you access to advanced morphs, but either way, his first match as Zerg, perhaps, I'm not sure. Certainly, it felt like one of the earlier matches that he's experienced, at least in terms of player versus player. I'm not sure if he's aware of how the Protoss work at this point, but honestly, not a bad performance for somebody who is brand spanking new to the project in that sense. He said that he's played before, maybe versus AI, but PvP he's still pretty green on. So thanks, Scoler, welcome. And yeah, your first loss was handed to you, at least as far as castover matches are concerned. They have played before, but your first loss being handed to you by Shambler. A tough opponent, but can you do better in our next game? Can you get on the board in the first casted series between you and this guy? Let's find out in the next match.